shir is dedicated, as all the shirim this year here, in memory of Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman, Shvachat Frist, La Shalom. The song Maoz Tzur, in all likelihood, the nigun, the traditional nigun, dates back to the 16th century. There's some want to push it back a little bit earlier, but there are musicologists who have identified various musical streams of the Maoz Tzur as found in liturgical music of the Protestant church. And that's not an accident, by the way. We even have in some of the Hasidic Nigunim, whether it's Lubavitch or Ger, where they were taken from some of the famous marches of music, Napoleon background era music. This is something that is known. Just as today, modern Jewish music sometimes integrates some of the rock and the bouncing. Thank you very much. Of modern day, and it's not an accident. North African music, Moroccan Jews, and Tunisian Jews reflect the music of that particular culture. So Maoz Tzur, the most accepted notion of this nigun that we use for Maoz Tzur seems to identify with some of the liturgical music of the Protestants. There are some that want to say that it's just the opposite, that it actually has Jewish basis, but Martin Luther liked it, and he brought it into the church. And that's not an accident either, by the way, almost similar to, if anybody remembers, Pope John Paul II. He was from the first pope that came out of Krakow, from Poland. And so he once had a big public mass in New Jersey at the Giant Stadium across the Hudson River, and there were almost as many people there as were for the Siyam HaShas, almost as many. And they sang Lemana Chai V'Re'ai with English words. Kalbach's Lemana Chai V'Re'ai, and this goes back to 1988 when Kalbach taught it to the church. And so, and they liked it, and they adopted it as part of their liturgical music. So these things can happen, that maybe Martin Luther took a liking to this particular song, not the Maoz Tzur, the nigun, the melody, not the lyrics, and it became part of the church music, but in all likelihood it was just the opposite, that it was church music and somehow another filtered down. Why would the Jewish home be interested in integrating a Protestant church song into our Masoret? And it has a lot to do with the enmity to the Catholic Church. It wasn't that Martin Luther was a tzaddik. He was a big anti-Shemi. There's no question about it. The only thing is that in Protestant countries, ultimately, Jews were allowed more religious freedom than they had on the Catholic Church domination. There, we suffered so, specifically in the days of the Crusades, the First Crusade, the Second Crusade, Third Crusade, and so on. So, and it's possible that there's even an allusion to one of the kings of the Third Crusade in the last stanza of Maoz Tzur. We will see it is a song that was not necessarily composed for Hanukkah. It was adopted for Hanukkah, but it's a song that talks about Jewish suffering, historic Jewish suffering, and the ultimate redemption. We call salvation, but that seems to be a Christian word. Help, get bailing out, and so on. And we'll see why it was adopted for Hanukkah. So let's see it inside. So you have on the page the whole song, 6 stanzas, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas, the opening, and then the 5 stanzas of history, and then the various source material of where these lines come from and what might be the background. So while we're all familiar with Maoz Tzur as children, most of us are not familiar with the understanding of the Maoz Tzur. So that's why we have a shir today. Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. What does that mean? What does it mean, Maoz Tzur? Tzur is the rock. Tzur Yisrael Kuma B'Yisrael. Tzur Tzavim Palo. Which means it's something about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Tzur Yeshuati. Kadosh Baruch Hu is the rock or the the strength of our help, right? And Maoz Tzur, where does that come from? So if you look at source number 1, it's the middle of the page from Tilim Lamed Aleph. The pasuk says, "Hatei Elai Oznecha." We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu as if to say to lend an ear, just pay attention, which means in English, pay attention. Mehira Hatzileni, quickly help me. I need help desperately. Hayei li, you shall be for me. L'tzur Maoz levet mitzudot lahoshieni. So you see, you have here Maoz Tzur, Brafuch Tzur Maoz lebeit mitzudot. Beit mitzudot means like a fortress. You should be for me a fortress to help me. So Tzur Maoz lahoshieni is rewritten as Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. Now you'd think that the author of the Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, did this. Well, that's poetic license. You can take the pasuk and work the words and shift the back and forth and so on. Except he's not the first one to say this. Now take a look at the acrostics of Maoz Tzur. Mem, Reish, Dalid, Chaf, Yud. That's Mordechai. So we know that the author is Mordechai. And the last stanza, Het. Well, there's no Mordechai, right? But if you look at the first 3 words of the last stanza, it's Chasov Zroa Kochecho, it's Chazak. And many of the Ashkenazi poets would build into the acrostics their name and then Chet Zayin Kuf, Chazak. That was a way of ending of sorts. So it is possible that this Chasov Zroa Kochecha, the last stanza, is an integral part of the song and authored by this Mordechai, whoever he is, which we don't know 100% till this very day. Or Chasof Zroa Kochecha was an add-on, was never part of the original song, and was attached to the Maoz Tzur poem, and we'll see in a few minutes why, what the significance was. So whether it's an original or whether it's an add-on, I can tell you that there were certain communities, and I grew up on this, that we never sang the last paragraph. We finished with Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai, and as being the Hanukkah stanza, and that was it. And the Chasof Zroa Kochecha, we just didn't sing. Some people do sing it. The fact that there were different minhagim, and it wasn't that my father was just hungry and wanted to get it over with, which that could have been the case, right? The latkes you smelled the latkes already. That if there were communities, and most probably this was the minhag of Galicia, that they didn't sing Chasof Zroa Kochecha, is an indication that we're dealing with 2 traditions. That it has that last stanza or it doesn't have the last stanza, which already is suggestive that it's an addition. Okay, so it could be an addition, but the Chazak, Chasof Zroa Kochecha, somehow gives me an impression that maybe it's not an addition, but it's the author, Mordechai, who would end with Chet Zayin Kuf, as many of the medieval poets did. There was a Mordechai ben Hillel in the end of the 13th century. There was a very, very big pogrom in Germany. It was called the Rindfleisch pogrom, 1298. One of the people murdered there was probably the Talmud Muvhak of the Maharam Rutenberg. Morena of Meir ben Baruch had a Talmud Muvhak whose name was Rabbi Meir HaKohen from Rutenberg, and he was the author of the Hagaot Maimoniot. Hagaot Maimoniot, anybody studying Rambam, and I'm sure everybody studies Rambam every single day, knows that with the small print on the bottom, you have Hagaot Maimoniot. This is an Ashkenazi great who does to the Rambam exactly what the Ramah Moshe Isserles, does to Rabbi Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch. He makes it Ashkenazi friendly because the Rambam was Sephardi, and if an Ashkenazi is reading this and you're going to take it at face value, you're not going to fulfill the halacha in accordance with Ashkenazi tradition. So he fills in the blanks, and he says, well, we do such and such, and we don't do such and such. And he does exactly what the Ramah does on Shulchan Aruch, to Rabbi Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch. This is the author of the Hagaot Maimoniot. I received for a bar mitzvah present an uncle of mine who's still living in Bnei Brak, a very miniature Rambam. And I remember on the train from Borough Park to Wash Nights to YU, One train, I would prepare the Kriyat Torah for that coming Shabbos, and one train, read Rambam. But the letters of the Hagaot Maimoniot was so small, I couldn't read it. Because, train moves, and you have to read the text itself. I was able to just make out that. So Hagaot Maimoniot is very, very important. He perishes in the Rindfleisch pogrom with his brother-in-law, Rabbi Mordechai ben Hillel, who authors the Mordechai. What's the Mordechai? Anybody studying Shas in yeshiva knows that one of the adjunct Balei Tosfot is known as the Mordechai. His Chidushim are printed in the back of a Shas Vilna under the name Mordechai ben Hillel. So it could be that he is the author of the Maoz Tzur. It makes sense historically. It makes sense in terms of what he's trying to say. Maybe it's somebody 100 years earlier, a Paitan Ashkenaz who's known as Mordechai ben something, and we don't know absolutely, but we think it could be this Mordechai ben Hillel because he's written other poems, and sometimes, just like every Kalbach Niggin sounds the same, people who write poetry, so sometimes their style can be matched to other poems that they've written, and the other poems that were written by this Rabbi Mordechai ben Hillel match the poem scheme of the Maoz Tzur. So he might be the Mordechai. Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. Well, was he the first one to take the pasuk of Tilim Lamed Aleph pasuk Gimel Heyeh li litzur Maoz levet mitzudot lehoshieni and write Maoz Tzur Yeshuati? Pay attention to Reb Shlomo ibn Gabirol. I know that's a street in Tel Aviv, it's a street in Yerushalayim, but he actually lived. He was a 11th century Spanish poem. When we took the trip to Spain a year and a half ago, we stood by a statue in Malaga. He's honored by the city of Malaga. Shlomo ibn Gabirol. Many of his poems have entered into the slichot and the kinot that we say. One of the slichot that we Ashkenazim say during the Aseret Mei Tshuva begins with Shachar Kamti Lahodot Lecha Elohai Tehilati. I've gotten up early in the morning. Of course, this said at 10 p.m. Slichas doesn't make sense, nor does it make sense for the 9:30 a.m. Shtibel late minyan. Actually, the 9:30 is the early minyan. The 11 o'clock would be the late minyan. So at 10:30 they get up early to say Slichas, So to say Shachar Kamti Lahodot, I got up early. This is in line with the Rambam says that it's al Shmorat HaBoker. Slichot is to be said before the break of dawn and to said for an hour. And the line that repeats itself is lifted out of Megillat Esther, Nafshi b'she'elati ve'ami b'vakashati. And that's a shir in itself. I don't want to get bogged down. But in the last stanza of this particular poem, it reads, Kadosh ki yadi kavda al anchati, ve'en chazeh mi yamod ba'adi, ve'en li beit menuchati, I don't have the Beit HaMikdash, levad ha'aver bicha askir shemecha, alone, I'm asking Kadosh Baruch Hu to wipe out our sins because we're mentioning your name. Who is your name? Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. I'll read it again. Becha azkir shimcha Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. So the first one to rework the pasuk in Tilim of Perek Lamed Aleph to Maoz Tzur Yeshuati was Shlomo ibn Gabirol. And it is very likely that this poem was well known in the Slichot, already in Ashkenaz in the 13th century. And whether it's Rabbi Mordechai ben Hillel or some other Rabbi Mordechai, opens up with this line, Maoz Tzur Yeshuati, Lecha na'eh l'shabeach. To you only is it worthy to say praise. Tikon beit tfilati, v'sham todah nizabeach. Please restore the house of prayer, and there we will offer the korban todah. Now, one second. Beit HaMikdash, nicknamed here Beit Tfilati. So if you look at source number 2 from Yeshayahu, V'haviyotim al har kodeshi v'simachtim b'Beit Tfilati, olotehem v'zivchehem l'ratzon al mizbechi, korbanot will be once again brought on the mizbeach, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikarei l'chol ha'amim. Beit HaMikdash, remember in America they used to have on the highways the International House of Pancakes? This is the International House of Prayer. The International House of, and who coined it the first time as the International House of Prayer? Shlomo HaMelech. At the opening ceremony of Bayit Rishon, Malachim Aleph Perek Chet, there's not a word about korbanot. The whole thing is about tefillah. The whole thing. Where we say in the Slichot, b'motzei menucha ki damnucha tchila, the first Motzei Shabbat of our Slichot, right? Lishmoa el harina vela tefillah. This is Shlomo Melech. And everything about that tefillah is just identifying Beit HaMikdash as the Beit Tefillah. And you have to realize that in the 13th century Ashkenaz, there was no Beit HaMikdash. It was just a fleeting dream. So they had Botei Knesset, Botei Midrash, they had Botei Tefillah. So to them, the focus of what Beit HaMikdash is, it's the International House of Tefillah, because we focus our Tefillah physically towards Beit HaMikdash. So he says, Tikon Beit Tefillati. That's what Beit HaMikdash is. There are other things there, of course. There's Korbanot and so on, we'll see. Visham Todah Nizabeach. He's mentioning specifically one type of korban that we would bring, the korban todah. There is a view in the Midrash Rabbah of Parshat Tzav in Sefer Vayikra that says that in the Acharit HaYamim, in the end of days, when we'll have Beit HaMikdash, there will be no more korbanot, animal sacrifices, only korban todah, Thanksgiving sacrifice. Why? Because if the korban essentially is for kapara, for atonement, there is this utopia idea that in Yemot HaMashiach, people won't sin. Who did not buy into this? The Rambam. The Rambam believed that human beings will still be frail and will still sin, except much less so. It's going to be a much healthier, both physical and spiritual society. But it's not going to be 100%. 100% will never be. So there will be need for a type of atonement for kapara and so on. Today's Rosh Chodesh, Roshei Chodashim Lamcha Natata, Zman Kapara. Rabbi Yehuda Levi says that Rosh Chodesh is a monthly Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur Katan. And that's why there is Yom Kippur Katan in the calendar, except you can't fast on Rosh Chodesh. So when is it? It's moved back to Erev Rosh Chodesh. And this month we couldn't have that either because it was Hanukkah, because the Hanukkah didn't have to fast. But usually you have a Rosh Chodesh. Day before is Yom Kippur Katan. There's actually Slichot that some people still say till today, this very day. That's Yom Kippur Katan. So Lechana V'Sham Todah Nizabeach reflects an unbelievable theme that Beit HaMikdash, in its major purpose, is not going to be korbanot. It's going to be a Beit Tefillah. And there, if there's going to be anything to offer as a sacrifice, it's going to be a korban todah. This is a reflection of this view in the Medrash, that the korban todah is the only korban that will be around in the third Beit HaMikdash. Even though the Rambam spends 2 full books of his 14 of the Mishnah Torah teaching us the detailed laws of Beit HaMikdash of every single korban, including chatat and asham and so on, begins each book of the 14 with a pasuk, either from Tillim or from Mishlei, that spells out the theme of that particular book. The book called Korbanot, the Rambam lifts out of Hallel, Lecha izbach zevach todah uv'shem Hashem ekra. And I have a hunch that the Rambam selected that pasuk in a type of halavai. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think that's going to happen in the Yemot HaMashiach. But halavai, that all we're going to need Beit HaMikdash is for Korban Todah. It's a type of expression of yiratzon, as if to say. Halavai, that's what it should be. So here, the Paitan is using V'sham Todah Nizabeach, reflecting on that pasuk, Lecha ezbach zevach Todah. You see, the whole thing is that pasuk. And then it says, Le'et tachin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should prepare the time, tachin, to prepare the time for what? Matbeach, or let me read it, mitbach. But it's not mitbach, the kitchen, it's the slaughter. We're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to slaughter who? Mitzar haminabeach, those anshei tzar, those ruthless ones who are minabeach, who are roaring, who are barking and biting us with trouble. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, destroy them outright. A tefillah that a Kadosh Baruch Hu should destroy the enemy. The eight tachin matbeach. There should be a tevach on mitzar haminabeach. Right? You should take along what went on in Beirut and so on, and what we've done in Gaza. Mamash mitbach mitzar haminabeach. As egmor b'shir mizmor chanukat hamizbeach. Then egmor is a halacha. The Rambam says the bracha when you complete Hallel. So, we have Hallel, we complete Hallel for 18 days during the year, which is 8 days of Sukkot and 1 day of Pesach and 1 day of Shavuot and 8 days of Hanukkah. And Chutz La'aretz is 21 days because you have to have Yom Tov Sheni. I don't know if you have to have it, but you have Yom Tov Sheni. Rosh Chodesh and the remaining days of Pesach, we only read Hallel abbreviated. People call it Chatzi Hallel. Chatzi Hallel, you say 90%, So the word Chatzi doesn't mean half, it means partial. Just like Chatzi Kaddish isn't half, and Chatzi Shi'ur, when you talk about less than a kazayat of eating matzah, it doesn't mean you ate 50% of matzah. It means yes, less than the whole. That's what Chatzi means. I once gave a shir in a Shabbos Agol Drasha in Ramot, and it was about the concept of eating less than a shi'ur of matzah and the isur of less than a shi'ur of chametz, and it was called Chatzi Shi'ur, and somebody actually asked me, when are you giving the second half of the shir? He thought it was, I'm only giving half the shir this time. I said, come back next year. You get the second half, right? But the Rambam believes that the bracha for Hallel, when we complete the Hallel, like today on Hanukkah, is ligmor et Hallel. Our nusach is v'tzivanu likro et Hallel. According to the Rambam, there's no bracha at all when you don't complete Hallel. According to the Rambam, there's no bracha on Rosh Chodesh or the remaining days of Hanukkah. And when you do say Hallel, with complete Hallel, it's ligmor et Hallel. Pesach, there's a Pesach, right? And others thought that you say ligmor et Hallel when you complete Hallel, and likro et Hallel when you read Hallel incomplete, like on Rosh Chodesh. And our minhag is to say likro et Hallel no matter what. But here he has az egmor b'shir mizmor, complete the Hallel b'shir mizmor. Where does that come from? Look at source number 4. No, let me explain something. 5, 6 on the bottom. Mizmor shir chanukat habayit leDavid. Mizmor shir chanukat. So he's using az egmor b'shir mizmor chanukat. So you see, he has Tilim Perek Lamed in his mind. Mizmor shir chanukat habayit. Az egmor b'shir mizmor chanukat habayit. Now chanukat habayit, if you flip the page, is mentioned in tomorrow morning's Kriyat TORAH at the end of 42 psukim. We're going to do the long laning tomorrow because we read from the 8th day of the Nisi'im till the 12th day and then the epilogue. Zot chanukat hamizbeach b'yom himashachoto, and the next pasuk Zot chanukat hamizbeach acharei himashachoto. The idea of Zot Chanukah, that's the nickname of tomorrow. Last day of Hanukkah is called Zot Chanukah. Some people say because the gematria of Zot is 8 without the tuf. Right? But I just don't look at the tuf. It's Zayin Aleph. It's 8. That's a great gematria. It's 408, except don't just ignore the 400. It's Zot Chanukah, and the idea we call Zot Chanukah because of the Kriyat TORAH, Zot Chanukat HaMizbeach, and the Paitan uses the Chanukat HaMizbeach because they made a Chanukat HaMizbeach in the Mishkan, and that's what you see in Parshat Bahalotcha. There was a Chanukat HaMizbeach. Of course, it all reflects back to Parshat Shmini, when the Mishkan was inaugurated, and the inauguration of the Mishkan had to do with the inauguration of the Mizbeach, because that was the key activity in the Mishkan in the desert. So therefore, it wasn't called Chanukat HaMishkan. Later, it is called, but it's called Chanukat HaMizbeach. And the Paitan says, let's do it again. And by the way, it was done once again in the Hanukkah story. So here you might have an indication of why this song became a Hanukkah song, because it's actually a tefillah for the third Beit HaMikdash, except that there was an episode in the second Beit HaMikdash where there was a Chanukat HaMizbeach, and therefore let's talk about it. But to get to that, The idea of le'et tachin matbeach mitzar hamanabeach. You look again at source number 4 and 5 on the first page on the bottom. So you have from Parshat Bishalach, the first war against Amalek. It ends with Vayomer Kiyad al Kes Ya Milchama la'Adonai ba'Amalek midor dor. Something about the seat of the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a war against Amalek, every single generation. Every single generation. Some generations it's worse. Sometimes it's just benign, but it's there. It's under the rug, and sometimes it comes out in the open, and it's very painful. So Rashi tells us there, Vayomer Moshe, Ki yad al kes ya, yado shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu hurma, was raised, lishava bikis'o, in his throne, liot lo milchama ve'eva b'Amalek olamit. Kadosh Baruch Hu is using his throne to battle Amalek, which means the battle against Amalek is not the Goy against the Jew. It's the Russia against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's what it is. We are the shlichim. We are on the battlefield. Umau case. What is kaf samach? It's actually kisei without the aleph. V'lo menemar kisei. V'af Hashem. It's yud and a hey. It's not yud hey vav and a hey. There's something that shriveled up from God's name. V'af Hashem nechlak lechetzio is cut in half. Nishba Kadosh Baruch Hu she'en Shem Shalem. God's name won't be complete. Ve'en Kis'o Shalem, and his throne won't be complete. Achi Yimachesh Shmo Shel Amalek Kulo, until total eradication and annihilation of Amalek. Ukeshimchesh Shmo Yashem Shalem V'Kisei Shalem. And then the Kadosh Baruch Hu's name is and his throne will be complete. So this is le'et tachin matbeach mitzar hamanabeach. And now what he does is what? Terrible. Yeah. And now we go, the poem says, let's take us through door, generations, where big things happened to Am Yisrael, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu was there. So the first one is going to be Mitzrayim. The second is going to be the first Beit HaMikdash destruction and Galut Bavel. The next is going to be the Purim story. The next is going to be the Hanukkah story. We'll hold off with the last till we finish this. Let's see it. Ra'ot Sava Nafshi. My life is satiated with evil, with bad deeds, with bad occurrences. Biyagon kochi chila. My strength is already evaporated. I have no more strength. I'm kaput. I'm exhausted, totally exhausted. Right? Chayai merdu bikoshi. My life was embittered. This is a takeoff on the word vayimararu et chayehem. The reason that we eat moror on Seder night. B'shiabud malchut egla. Who's egla? Flip quickly to source number 8. Source number 8 from Yirmiyahu, Perek Memvav. Egla yefefiyah Mitzrayim, keretz mitzafon baba. So there's an allusion or an association of Mitzrayim to Egla and Malchut Egla, the kingdom of Egypt, and the poet here uses it. Chayai merdu bikoshi. B'shiabud malchut egla, being enslaved to the Egyptian kingdom. Uviyado hagdola, and that's yad hagdola, yad chazaka v'kadosh baruch hu, hotzi et hasgula. The skula is Am Yisrael. Am skula, right? I have the pasuk here in source number 10, source number 9 rather. Vatem im shemot tishmu b'koli, shmartem et briti, v'item li skula mikol ha'amim. Am Yisrael is the chosen. Chel paro v'chol zar'o, Yordu ke'even bimtzula. This is just a takeoff from Shirat Hayam of source number 10. Tomot yichasyumu Yordu bimtzulot kemo even. Chazal say that the Egyptians went down in 3 different ways, like stone, like straw, kakash, and like oferet, like lead. And the Chazal said there were 3 different levels of Egyptians. Those who were the tzaddikim of the, even amongst the Rishonim, they were the better ones. They died without pain. They went down like lead. Those who are the in-betweeners, so they suffered a little bit and went down like stone. And those who were the biggest Rishonim went down like straw, which means it took a long time till they went down. And they suffered going down. So here the Paitan picks on the middle one. Chel paro v'chol zaro yodu ke'evim zor. That's Yetziat Mitzrayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu was there for us. And then Devir. What is Devir? It's a nickname of Beit HaMikdash. Right? If you remember from Hoshanas, the second day of Hoshana, of Even Shtiyah, Beit HaBchira, Goren Ornan, Dvir HaMutzna, Har Yera'eh, and you just go on, 22 letters of Aleph Bet, you have 22 nicknames of Yerushalayim, but the Medrash says there are 70. But here the Paitan just uses 22 because he's using the alphabet. So Dalit is the Dvir, Kodsho Heviani. You brought us to the land of Eretz Yisrael and we built the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Land. Dvir Kodsho. After Yetziat Mitzrayim, we come to Eretz Yisrael. Vigam Sham Lo Shekatati. No, it wasn't quiet there at all. We had to deal with Aram, we had to deal with Ashur, and then we had to deal with Bavel. It was not quiet at all. And all you have to do is read Sefer Shmuel and Sefer Mulachim, and you see how not quiet it was. Uva nogeis v'higlani. The nogeis, the oppressor came and sent us to Galut. And this was the crushing blow of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. Why? Ki zarim avadati. We served avodah zarah, idolatry. Ki zarim avadati. We served avodah zarah. V'yein ra'al masachti. I was drinking the drink of poison. That's how bad it was. Kim at sha'avanati. We were almost totally lost. That's a takeoff on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Vav. Lulei Hashem tzvaot tzvid kistom daminu kamora daminu kistom hayinu kamora daminu. If you wouldn't have left over a remnant, srid, a remnant, then we would have been finished. We would have been like Sodom and Amorah. So this is what he's picking up, and he's saying, Kim Acha Avarti. We were almost totally lost. It was by the grace of God that what remained, 10 Shvatim were annihilated, and 2 remained, Yehuda and Binyamin, of course some Levium, who were the Levium and Kohanim, Kate's Bavel, but then Bavel had its end. When does Bavel have its end? With the rise of the Persian Empire. And that's 18 years after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. Already Babylonians are not in town. And now it's Persia. Kate's Bavel, Zerubbabel, we'll see he was one of the first governors of Eretz Yisrael at Shivat Zion. Lekate Shivim Noshata, you helped us out after 70 years of Galut. Flip the page to source number 11 rather. For one possible identity of Zerubbabel, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Chet says, Shenizra beBavel. He's actually Babylonian grown. Mashmo, what's his real name? Nehemiah ben Chiklio Shemo. He's actually a famous Nehemiah from Ezra Nehemiah. There's only one problem to this. The dates don't match. And Nehemiah actually comes to Yerushalayim way after Zerubbabel. So there's a thought that he is identified with. The same Gemara in Masechet Megillah, with regard to the Persian kings, so the Gemara says, Hu Achashverosh, Hu Daryavesh, Hu Artachshasta. Now 1 second. There are 3 different kings. So what does it mean? He's the same. Gemara wants to say, it's the same guy, same one. Once he's called this, once he's called that. It's almost like Hu Malach HaMavet, Hu HaSatan, Hu HaYetzer Hara. It's all the same thing. So I once heard from a great professor, Meir Hershkowitz, from YU. He was my teacher in history, a wonderful person. So he said what Chazal was saying was, who Carter, who Obama, same thing. Zelba Drek, all these presidents, one after that, they were bad to us and so on. That's what Chazal was saying. Who Daryavesh, who Artachshasta. They were talking about Daryavesh the first, by the way, not Daryavesh the second, who according to Chazal was a son of Esther Malka. And he was the one who really gave Am Yisrael a kick in the pants to go back to Eretz Yisrael, way after the declaration of Koresh, and so on. So Chazal associate him perhaps with Nehemiah, but it's a reference directly to the beginning of Bayit Sheni, who Kate's Bavel, the Golas Bavel ends, and then there's Zerubbabel, the beginning of the Bayit Sheni, Shivat Zion, Kate Shivim Noshati, you helped us at the end of 70 years of Galut. And then what happens in the Persian era? And this is still before the building of the second Beit HaMikdash. Kurot Komat Birosh Bikesh. Kurot Komat Birosh Bikesh. Let's identify Birosh. Birosh is actually a besamim. It's a spice. So flip the page. Let's identify page number 12. Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani Patach La Pitra. Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani opened up the following midrash with the following parsha. Tachat hana'atzutz ya'aleh birosh, v'tachat hasirpad ya'aleh hadas. This is from Yeshayahu. We read it on a Tanit Tzibur by Mincha. Tachat hanatzutz yaleh berosh v'tachat hasirpad yaleh hadas. Right? We know this pasuk. So Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani explains this as follows. Tachat hanatzutz is a reference to Haman. Tachat Haman harasha shasa atzmo avodah zara, made himself into an avodah zara, which the whole reason that people didn't want to bow down to him, they bowed down to him. Korim mishtachavim lahaman, and Mordechai lo yichrev v'lo yishtachaveh, because there was some type of statue on his chain, and they didn't want to bow down to it. And the Gemara proves that Natzutz is Avodah Zarah, Dechtiv, B'chol HaNatzunim, B'chol HaNahalalim, reference to Avodah Zarah. And who is Birosh? Ya'aleh Birosh. Somebody instead of Haman, who's going to rise? Mordechai. Shenikra, Rosh L'kol HaPsamim, the head of all of the spices. As it says, Vata kach lecha psamim Rosh in Parshat Kitisa, Mordror. What's Mordror? In the Onkelos, in the translation of Onkelos, Mordror is Meri Dachi, spelled Mordechai. And that's weird. Notice you can't even get it from the words. You have to, under the rug, you have to get it from the Onkelos translation that it Meri Dachi is Mordechai. But what does that mean, that Mordechai is the spice? I can only understand it by introducing a Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, Breiter Perplexed. Rambam gives us reasons for the mitzvot in the third section of the Moreh Nevuchim, and he says the reason for the Ktoret, why was there Ktoret in Beit HaMikdash? It was a deodorant. It was deodorant. Can you imagine what must have smelled like in Beit HaMikdash? A Schlachtois. You go into a slaughterhouse, or you go into a butcher, right? It stinks. So you want to get out as quickly as you can because your clothing, everybody's going to know where you just were in the last 15 minutes, just by the scent from your clothing. Now, can you imagine Beit HaMikdash having that kind of an odor, a foul odor? There's blood, there's shechita, meat, you know? So who's going to want to go to Beit HaMikdash? Beit HaMikdash is supposed to be l'chavod teferet, pleasant to be there. So the Torah figured out what the, toilet room, bathroom spritzes, figured out a long time ago, this deodorant, room deodorant. So you had the Ktoret giving off a deodorant type of smell that neutralized the foul odor of Beit HaMikdash, and it was so potent that the Chazal say, in Yericha you can smell the Ktoret from Beit HaMikdash. That's why it's called Yericha, because of Reach Nichoach. From the Reach of the Beit HaMikdash, you can catch the scent of the Ktoret. And by the way, one of the 11 items of the Ktoret, the Chelbana, also had a foul odor. And the Chazal teach us that part of Am Yisrael is also foul odor. And don't throw him away. He's part of Am Yisrael. You might think, well, I'm a tzaddik, and I live in a Jewish neighborhood, and a religious neighborhood, a Haredi neighborhood, and everything. I don't want to have to do with somebody else. Wrong. Klal Yisrael has Chelbana as part. But here, who is the Birosh? The Birosh is the top of the line of the Ktoret. And according to the Rambam, that the Ktoret was the scent that neutralized the foul odor. It says, Mordechai yada et kol asher nasa. And Mordechai heard what was going on. What happened? He read the papers. He heard CNN that there's going to be an edict of extermination against Am Yisrael. No. Mordechai couldn't understand what went wrong, that Am Yisrael is now deserving total extermination. Lashmid, larog, ulabed, et kol hayudim, minar vatzakein, taf v'nashim biyom echad. What did they do? Mordechai yada et kol asher nasa means ha'asimon nafal, or in English, it clicked. Today, when you tell the kids asimon nafal, you first have to explain what a public telephone is and what the asimonim are, and when they clicked, they don't know what you're talking about, because it's in the Museum of Natural History next to the dinosaur, the public telephones. It clicked. What clicked? Now I got it. I understand why. Koresh gave an edict. Says, you have a license to go back to Eretz Yisrael. Build the Beit HaMikdash. You don't have to have an army. Just go and build the Beit HaMikdash, and the Persian army is going to protect. It'll be fine. And there were no takers. The last time there were no takers for Eretz Yisrael, it's called the Meraglim. There were no takers. They didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? Yitamu v'sham yamutu. That's it. Hold on. I'm just going to close it up. Close up the shop. That's it. This generation is not going in. And Chazal say in this Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Yitamu olam hazeh v'sham yamutu olam haba. They lose everything. The generation that saw Yetziat Mitzrayim and all the Makot and the Kriyat Yamsuf and Ma'amad Har Sinai lose everything. Everything. Because they didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. And now it's happening again in the days of Persia. And Mordechai says that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing. Yitamu v'sham yamutu. Lashmid la'roget kol hayudim. I got it. And that's why when you talk about Purim, you have to see the Eretz Yisrael component in the story of Purim. And there certainly was an Eretz Yisrael component. So Mordechai was the barosh. He was the besamim to somehow neutralize the foul odor of Klal Yisrael. And that's why Chazal called him the barosh. And here the Paitan says, Krot komat barosh bikesh. Somebody wanted to hang Mordechai. Cut down a tree, right? And a tall tree, Gavoa Chamishim Amah, and going to hang the barosh. Who wanted to do that? Agag ben Hamadata. We don't even mention the name Haman. He's Haman ben Hamadata, right? Agag ha'agagi. V'niyata lo lepachu l'mokesh. But Kadosh Baruch Hu twisted around and he fell into his own trap. Haman fell into his own trap. V'gavato, and his haughtiness, nishbata, was broken. Because the way circumstances was with Mordechai and Esther working this out, and Esther specifically working this out. Umi yodea im la'et chazot higat lamalchut, right? Rosh Yemini Niseta. Kadosh Baruch Hu elevated who's the Yemini? Mordechai. Ish Yemini haya b'Shushan Abira Shmo Mordechai from Shevet Binyamin. He was raised v'oyev Shmo Machita, and the name of the enemy was erased. That's why he doesn't even mention Haman. He calls him Agag ben Hamadata. Haman doesn't exist anymore. He's out of the picture. He's off the radar. Rov banav bikinyanav ala etalita. And most of his children and his possessions were hanged on the tree. So my wife asked me, who are the kinyanim? I just gave the answer. It was his wives. Hayisha nikneit b'shalosh derachim. The acquisition of men in rabbinic literature is a kinyan. So when he says Rov banav, it wasn't that they hanged his furniture or his microwave. They hanged his wives, that were the kinyanim, and Rov banav. Why a majority of the children? Who got away? Who escaped? So turn to the page number 13 from the Gemara in Gittin, Nun Zayin. This is the famous Gemara of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, the Churban Abayit. Mibnei banav shel Haman limdu Torah b'bnei Brak. And who is that? Rabbi Akiva. This is just one version. See what I was very careful. Alpi nuschaot. There's a missing aleph. It's supposed to be nuschaot. The aleph got dropped by accident. Shonot. The different versions. Who are the bnei banav? Who are the children, descendants of Haman, who taught, not studied, limdu, taught Torah in Bnei Brak? One opinion, it was Rabbi Akiva. We do know that Rabbi Akiva's father was a Roman, was a ger. We know that. Rambam says it, but it's mentioned in the Gemara. So this Roman may have had genealogical connections to Haman. So therefore, we have to understand that not all of Haman's children were wiped out. And that's why he says, Rov banav, most of his children. But there were survivors. And some, generations later, taught Torah in Bnei Brak. I once had a situation in Ramot where we used to have guests coming for Shabbat, and people would introduce me. Okay, fine, very shalom aleichem. What are we doing these days? I'm learning in Shavei Chevron. There's Yeshiva Shavei Chevron. It's an offshoot of Merkaz Rav Kook. And then the host from Ramot tells me, he's a great-grandson of Trotsky. Trotsky. Remember Lenin and Trotsky from the Bolshevik Revolution? Trotsky's turning over in his grave. That he has a Ur Einikel, a great-grandson, learning Torah in Shavei Chevron Yeshiva in the city of Hebron. This was what Chazal was saying. B'bnei banav shel Haman limdu Torah b'bnei Brak. So Trotsky was Jewish, but he was a Russia Marusha. he was a Rosh Marusha, without a doubt. So it happens to him in Jewish. But to think that, okay, so he should be, for the rest of humanity, no. Let's finish. The next stanza is Hanukkah. Yevanim nikbetzu alai. The Greeks gathered up against us in war. Azai bimei Chashmonaim, in the days of the Chashmonaim. Portzu chomot migdalai. They broke through the walls of my tower, which means Beit HaMikdash. V'timu kol hashmonaim, and they profaned all the oil. Uminotar kankanim, what was left a little bit in the jars, the jugs. Na'aseh nes la shoshanim. Who are the roses? OUisrael in Shir HaShirim. We are the roses. B'nei Bina, the people with sense, they were the Sanhedrin, the Chachamim. B'nei Bina instituted Yemei Shmona for 8 days, Kav'u Shir Urnanim, days of Hallel and Hodaya, of Hallel and Alanisim. So this is the Hanukkah. So that's self-explanatory. We understand exactly who this is. Let's get to the last stanza. The last stanza is not in past tense. All the 5 are in past tense. We had Mitzrayim, and we had the Babylonians, and we had the Persians, and we had the Greeks. We had, and Kadosh Baruch Hu bailed us out of all of them. Milchama Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. But now it's the contemporary situation. Chasof zroa kodshecha v'karev kates hayeshua. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, flex your muscles, your holy muscles, and initiate karev kates hayeshua. Bring the kates, the end, quickly. Where does this come from? So you don't have it on the page, but it's from Yeshayahu Perek Nun Bet. Yeshayahu Perek Nun Bet. And it says, Chasaf Hashem et zroa kodsho le'enei kol hagoyim v'ra'u kol avsei aretz et yeshuat Eloheinu. The phrase Chasaf Hashem et zroo kodsho is lifted out of Yeshayahu Nun Bet. Chasof zroa kodshecha v'karev kates hayeshua. Nikom nikmat avadecha, should take revenge. This is written by somebody who saw the suffering right in front of his eyes and may have been one of those who fell in 1298 in the Rindfleisch pogrom. May Uma Harasha'ah, from the wicked nation. He's referring to the Catholic Church, by the way. And where does Nikom Nikmat Avadecha, does it sound familiar? It's from the Avarachamim that we say on Shabbat before Musaf, which was written after the First Crusade of 1096. Nikom Nikmat Avadecha Hashafuch. Ki Orcha Hasha'ah. It's stretching out, it's too long, this Galut. The others, there was 70 years Galut. Even Mitzrayim, whether it's 210 or 400 years, here it's already 1,200 years since the Churban. Ki Orcha Hasha'ah. And the Ramban tells us in Parshat Bechukotai that the difference between the Tochacha of Vayikra and the Tochacha of Parshat Kitavo, in Vayikra, there are a few psukim of Tochacha, you get through it, in a Seder, you get through it. But in Kitavo, it doesn't end. It's just on and on and on and on. It gets from one to worse and worse to even, as we say, worser. It gets worse and worse with time. Ramban says the first Tochacha is the 70 years of Galut. It was defined, it was limited. The second Galut, it's just unending. And it's getting worse and worse with time. And that's the Tochacha, Parshat Kitavo. Ki Orcha Hasha'ah. Ve'en kates limei hara'ah. There's no ending. It seems to me it's endless. Dechei Admon. Push the Admoni. Who is the Admoni? Esav, Edom, Rome. The incarnation of Rome is the Catholic Church in the 12th century, in the 13th century. B'tzel Tzalmon, the Tzelem, the cross. In the shadow of the cross, you should push them. Hakem lanu ro'im shiva. Bring back the spirit of the 7 shepherds. Who are the 7 shepherds? Turn the page. Source number 13. So first of all, look at source number 14. You see the phrase in Micha, Parakeh. Vaya ze shalom ashur ki yavo ba'artzenu v'chi yidroch ba'amanotenu v'hakimonu alav shiv'a ro'im u'shmona nisichei adam. So the Gemara actually, in the Medrash, tries to define who are the 7 and who are the 8, and they're all different types of possibilities. One, it's the 7 ushpizen from the sukkah, and that's not an accident. There's connections, it's a whole shir on connecting Sukkot to Hanukkah. Beit Hillel say we light from 1 to 8 because of always increasing, Malin Bakodesh. Beit Shammai says we borrow the descending order from the Korbanot of Chag HaSukkot, Parei HaChag, from 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, which adds up to 70 Korbanot, Keneged Shivim Umot Olam, and it ends with Shmini Atzeret 1. According to Beit Shammai, you start with 8, but you work your way down to 1. And 1 is Achta Echad V'Shimcha Echad, Umika Amcha Yisrael Goyach Ha'Ba'aretz. It was the Noam Elimelech, Rabbi Elimelech from Lizensk, the great Hasidic leader, 3rd generation of Hasidut, Baal Shem Tov, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid from Mezrich, Dov Ber, and his prime student, one of his prime students, who is the Elimelech from Lizensk. He's the one who brings Hasidut from the Ukraine area to Poland. And from then on, Hasidut is center, becomes Poland. Of course, another contemporary of the Noam Elimelech was Shneur Zalman from Liadi, the founder of Chabad, but he's going the other way to Russia. But in Elimelech from Lizensk is in the town Lizensk, visitable. We've been there many times over, and has a sefer that his son puts together of his teachings, and it's called the Noam Elimelech. And let's get inside. He's looking at the pasuk that we're going to read tomorrow. Balotchat hanerot emul pnei hamnorah ya'iru shiv'at hanerot. The pasuk that tells Aaron HaKohen to light the menorah in the Mishkan. The od yesh ledaktek b'lashon ya'iru shivat he'ela neroteha. Vayalo lomar he'ir neroteha. What does it mean he'ela neroteha? The word should have been he'ir neroteha. And he says, based on the Zohar HaKadosh, the 7 ro'im to Yisrael are Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. They are the 7 ushpizen. Shalehem omdim kol ha'olamot. The whole world stands on these 7 shepherds. Shehem me'irim b'shiva yemei binyan. They are illuminating 7 days of construction. Vehem yesod ha'olamot. They are the foundations of the existence of the world. V'nimtza hatzadikim nikraim orot. The tzadikim are called the light. V'hine hatzadik ha'oved Hashem be'emet. The tzaddik who serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu faithfully. Tzarich likasher atzmo b'shiva ro'im aniskarim la'el. Have to link themselves. Every tzaddik has to link themselves to the 7 shepherds mentioned above. Vashem Yitbarach melamed l'tzadik, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu teaches the tzaddik, shelo ze bilvad yaseh likasher atzmo b'shiva ro'im. Not only is it enough to bind himself with the 7 shepherds, rak yiksher atzmo b'klaliut Yisrael. He's got to bind himself with all of Klal Yisrael as well. Gamkein. Ach zot bilti efsher. It's impossible. Likshor atzmo b'klalut Yisrael. You cannot bind himself with all of Klal Yisrael u'b'shivat haro'im bevat achat simultaneously. Ki be'echu mekasher atzmo b'klalut Yisrael. The time that he's binding himself with Klal Yisrael, tzarich lereid. He's got to descend. Ulatot atzmo mimadreko elyon. He's got to go down from the upper strata. Ube'echu mekasher atzmo b'shiva ro'im. And when he's connecting himself to the 7 shepherds, azayu ole gavoa me'al gavoa. He's got to go up and up and up and up, and he's not linked to Klal Yisrael, so he can't do this simultaneously. You can't have both bindings at the same time. What a Kadosh Baruch Hu said, daber el Aaron, and so on. Hainu lelamed sheyaseh b'hadraga. Do it in levels. Do it b'hadraga. First of all, you have to connect to Klal Yisrael. In the 7 ro'im. And the 7 ro'im are going to be the 7 rungs of the menorah. That is to say, they are the 7 shepherds. El mul pnei. They are, look at the menorah. They are the klalut Yisrael. This is Klal Yisrael. Hanikraim pnei hamnorah. Shem hashoresh v'aguf menorah. They are the sword, the root, and the body of the menorah. V'achar kach, and only afterwards, ya'iru shiv'at hanerot. Then you can light the 7 candles, they are the 7 haroim shetit kasher v'ta'ir bahem. It's an unbelievable Hasidic thought based on the Zohar of the Noam Elimelech, teaching, spelling out who are the 7 haroim. And it is very possible in the 13th century, when the Zohar became known already, that the author of the Maoz Tzur is already linking himself to this idea of the 7 haroim. Dichei Admon, B'tzel Admon, Hakem Lanu Ro'im Shiva. Here you have a scenario, a contemporary tzara of Jews being wiped out generation after generation, the first crusade and the second crusade, and now the third crusade, and this pogrom and that pogrom. And we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is going on too long, and you have to take it in hand, and Nikom nikmat avadecha me'umah ha'sha'a, ki orka ha'sha'a, ve'in ketz li me'ar ha'sha'a, dechei admon, push away, kick him away of the admoni, b'tzel tzamon, in the shadow of his cross. Hakem lanu ro'im shiv'ah. So these 7 neirot will once again shine in the Beit HaMikdash. And this is Az Egmor, Bishir Mizmor, Chanukat HaMizbeach. The idea that Chanukah became the symbol that it can happen. There can be a Chanukat HaMizbeach. What once was in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, Zot Chanukat HaMizbeach B'yom Mishachoto, did happen a second time around, and it can happen again. And we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu not to wait too long a time. This was written almost 750, 800 years ago, and it still didn't happen. And tonight, when we light the last candle, we're going to sing Maoz Tzur slowly and understand and internalize every single line. And Kadosh Baruch Hu got us out of Mitzrayim, and he got us out of Galut Bavel, and he got us out of the mess in Paras, in Madai, in Persia, in the Haman story. And he got us out of the Hellenists and the Greeks. He got us out of all that. Get us out of Galut Edom, finally. Dechei Admon, Betzel Tzamon, Hakem Lanu, Ro'im Shiv'ah, that we should have a sut of being nehene, to derive something from the spirituality of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, and David. So, next week we're going to do the piyut for the slichot for Asara B'Tevet. Asara B'Tevet will come out on Friday this year. So next week is the 8th of Tevet, and we'll do a piyut from the slichot of Asara B'Tevet. Okay.